Each morning by 6:15, Walter Merritt sat alone on the weathered park bench near Clearfield's Veterans Monument. Quiet, invisible, forgotten. The breeze carried a damp chill as it swept across the square, rustling the faded paper posters taped to lampposts. Announcements for the Veterans Day parade, same as every year. Walter adjusted his worn medic's coat, patched twice at the elbow, and ran one calloused hand along the base of the monument behind him. The letters once gilded, now dulled by decades of Oregon rain, still spelled the promise. To those who served, we remember. He touched the words as he always did, then let his hand fall. The park stirred slowly, sparrows flitted between naked branches across the square. Maple Diner blinked to life, neon signs flickering above a hand-painted "Open at 6" hung slightly crooked in the window. Inside Mrs. Holly poured the first round of coffee for the old men, who always arrived before the sun, their flannel collars high and voices low. They glanced toward Walter's bench sometimes. Most days they didn't. Walter unscrewed the dented thermos from his canvas bag and poured a slow stream of black coffee into the matching metal cap. No cream, no sugar, just heat. From the inside pocket, he pulled a wrapped handkerchief, today's ration. Half a biscuit split from yesterday's offering at the diner. A stray dog with a stiff back leg approached wary but familiar Walter, set the biscuit down beside the bench. The dog sniffed, then ate and sat down beside him. They sat like that most mornings, not quite companions, not quite strangers, at 7:45, the dog wandered off. Walter folded the handkerchief, packed the thermos, and stood. The parade signs flapped lazily as he made his way toward the east end of the park, where children were already gathering for school drop-off. He walked with a steady gait, chin tucked slightly, the weight of his bag across one shoulder. As he passed the playground, he noticed a small boy, maybe 6, standing alone near the edge of the fence. Red hoodie, untied shoes, no adult in sight. Walter slowed. The boy looked up, wide-eyed. "Lost?" Walter asked quietly. The boy nodded. Walter scanned the park, then knelt. "See that blue sign over there?" He pointed toward the playground gate. "That's where they'll look for you." The boy hesitated. Walter extended a hand, not to hold, just to guide. Together they walked slowly toward the gate. Before they reached it, a woman rounded the corner, breathless eyes panicked. "There you are," she cried. She grabbed the boy's shoulders and pulled him close. Her eyes snapped to Walter. "Did he touch you?" The boy blinked, confused. The woman's voice sharpened. "Did this man touch you?" The boy didn't answer. She stepped between them, shielding the child with her arms. Walter raised both hands slightly. "He was just... Don't talk to me." She fumbled for her phone. "Stay right there." Minutes later, a patrol car pulled up, tires grinding on the gravel path. Officer Keenan stepped out, fresh-faced, hair too neat for the wind. "Sir," he called. Walter didn't move. Keenan approached, placing himself between Walter and the woman. "I got a report you were following a child. Is that correct?" Walter shook his head. He was lost. Keenan glanced at the boy, then the mother, who nodded vigorously. "Do you have ID?" Walter reached into his coat, slowly pulled out a weathered wallet. No license, no card, just a folded paper with medical numbers and an expired bus pass. "You live around here?" Keenan asked, sort of. "Can you elaborate?" Walter said nothing. Keenan looked down at the coat, the patches, the strange badge pinned just above the left pocket. A medic's cross, scuffed and half-rusted. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me," Keenan said. Walter didn't protest. He let himself be led toward the cruiser, one hand resting gently on the canvas bag. The dog, watching from the distance, didn't follow. As they passed Maple Diner, Mrs. Holly was wiping down the window. Her eyes met Walter's for a moment. He nodded the same way he always did, but she didn't nod back. She turned. Later that morning, inside the beige corridors of the courthouse basement, Public Defender Julia Tran stared at the slim folder on her desk, one page. No address, no known relatives, no prior convictions. And one note scribbled diagonally in pencil across the intake form, claims to be a veteran. No records found. Julia Tran had seen hopeless cases before. But Walter Merritt's file wasn't hopeless, it was hollow. She flipped the slim folder closed and stared at her reflection in the courthouse office window, dulled by the drizzle. Beyond her desk was a chaos of paper stacks, sticky notes, a half-open casebook with mustard from last week's sandwich still staining the margin. A rusting space heater clicked and groaned in the corner, coughing up uneven warmth that made her office smell faintly of dust and burnt toast. She looked down again. The single pencil-scrawled note at the bottom of the intake form nagged like a splinter. Claims to be a veteran, no records found. That didn't sit right. She tapped a pen absently against her lip. That's not how the VA works, she muttered. By the time she reached the holding room, the fluorescent lights above flickered like a bad memory. Concrete walls closed in around a bolted-down bench. And there he was, Walter Merritt, still upright. Weathered in the way stone is weathered, not broken, but marked, Mr. Merritt. Julia kept her voice even. He didn't look at her. His eyes were trained on a crack in the floor. I'm Julia Tran, public defender. I've been assigned. Don't waste your breath. His voice was low even. She studied him. Mid-60s, maybe older. A coat that predated her birth, and boots that had seen more than Oregon mud. There was a stillness to him, unnerving, deliberate. Not defeated, just done. I'd like to understand what happened in the park, she said gently. Walter didn't speak. His hand rested on a canvas bag at his feet. With a cautious motion, Julia knelt to the side, giving him space, and gestured, "May I?" He didn't answer. But he didn't stop her. Inside the bag, a dented thermos, a folded handkerchief, and a smaller pouch. She opened it carefully. The dog tag was the first thing she saw, bent, nearly snapped in half. Only the letters Mayor remained. The badge came next, scorched metal, shaped like a medic's cross, edges warped, and then the photograph, black and white faces nearly blurred out with time. 6 men in uniform, a chopper in the background. She turned it over, nothing written. She stood returning the items to the bag with care. "There's a tattoo on your wrist," she said after a moment. Walter didn't flinch, but he pulled his sleeve down slowly. Julia sat across from him. "My grandfather served in Vietnam, radio operator. He had a tattoo too, unit number on one arm, names of the dead on the other, still." Silence. Julia stood. "If you change your mind, I'll be back." She paused. "I don't think you're the monster they're painting, but I need something to work with." Back in her office, the air felt heavier. Outside, Clearfield's gray had deepened to a steady drizzle. She poured chamomile tea into her steel thermos lid and sat cross-legged on the edge of her desk. Mr. Harlan shuffled in 10 minutes later, winded from the stairs and smelling faintly of eucalyptus rub. "You look like you're thinking too hard," he said. Julia handed him the photo. He took it, squinting. "Who gave you this?" "My client." He turned it over. "No names." "Nope." He studied it again, slower this time. "This patch doesn't exist anymore. I tried the Army database, got nothing." "Some ghosts are meant to stay buried, Jules," he said, handing it back. "Especially the ones we send to do things we don't want to remember." "I'm not ready to bury him," she said. Later in the records room, she found Maggie, the clerk, eating a pumpkin muffin on her break. She offered Julia one from the paper bag on her lap. "Clearfield Bakery," Maggie said. "Still uses real cinnamon." Julia took one and sat beside her. "Do you know a man named Walter Merritt?" Maggie blinked. "Tall, quiet, always at the monument." Julia nodded. "I saw him. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago." Cold morning. He put flowers under the memorial, small bunch, wrapped in a grocery bag. Every November 11th. Maggie nodded. Never said a word. Just left them and walked away. Back at her desk, the courthouse hum settled into its midday lull, phones ringing down the hall, typewriters from a department that hadn't upgraded since 1993. She turned the photo over again, her fingers trembling. That uniform. That patch. Why does it look familiar? She opened her laptop, fingers flying. Walter Merritt, Hanwha, 1972. A veteran photo archive site blinked open, the cursor spun. Then the screen flashed, access restricted. In the Maple Diner's back room, a photo changed everything, especially for a judge who'd buried the past long ago. The room smelled like coffee grounds and history. Dust motes hung in sunbeams that filtered through old curtains, casting a soft haze over shelves lined with photo albums, flag cases, and framed black and white portraits. A glass box near the window displayed ration stamps and a folded American flag signed by soldiers from 3 wars. Hal Bishop leaned forward over the photo Julia had placed between them on a scratched table. He didn't touch it. His eyes narrowed as if time itself were catching up. "That's Walt," he said finally. "I hadn't seen that man in 40 years. Julia's pen hovered over her legal pad. "You're sure?" Hal nodded, then tapped the edge of the picture. "I remember the shoulders. He stood like a man ready to move, not talk. Where was this Hanwha, Korea 72? Hal looked up. "There's a reason no one finds that patch in modern databases." He sat back, exhaling slowly. "Walt was a medic. We called him Ghost Doc. He moved fast, always quiet. The kind of guy who would bandage your arm before you knew you were bleeding." Julia tilted her head. "You two served together." "Not officially. We crossed paths. I was embedded with a comms unit. Hanwha was a mess. One of those technically didn't happen places." He leaned closer. "If Walt's here in Clearfield, you need to talk to someone who remembers more than me." Who? Hal didn't answer immediately. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a weathered notebook. He flipped to a name scrawled in red ink, Greaves. Ronald. He was a lieutenant. Green book smart. Scared as hell, got caught in a blast once. Walt pulled him out. Julia looked up sharply. "Judge Greaves." Hal nodded. "Same guy, but don't expect him to thank you for stirring it." 15 minutes later, Julia stood outside Greaves's chambers. Through the frosted glass, she could hear muffled typing and the occasional shuffling of paper. A muffled trumpet line drifted in from outside. The high school band was rehearsing 2 blocks down for the parade. The judge's clerk waved her in. Greaves sat behind a heavy oak desk, dark wood paneling, framing commendations and photographs. Law school bench swearing in a younger version of him, in full military uniform. "Miss Tran," he said without looking up, "you have 5 minutes. I'll only need 3, she replied. She stepped forward and placed the photograph and the scorched badge on the edge of the desk. His pen stopped mid-sentence. "I believe this man. Walter Merritt served under your command at Hanwha." He looked up sharply. She said nothing more, just waited. Greaves picked up the photo with slow fingers. The creases formed fault lines across faces and uniforms. Then his eyes fell to the badge and something in him seemed to deflate. He stood and walked to the window. Below, children crossed the street with parade streamers and miniature flags. "I haven't seen that name in decades," he murmured. "I'd convinced myself it didn't exist anymore." "Walter saved your life," Julia said softly. "I know." He turned. He shouldn't be in a jail cell. Julia gathered the items silently, but didn't move to leave. "Help me prove who he is." Greaves returned to his desk and opened a lower drawer. He paused, fingers trembling, then shut it again. Not yet. That night, Julia visited Walter in holding. The room was dim, fluorescent bulbs casting shadows under his eyes. "I spoke to Greaves," she said. Walter looked up, then down again. "I didn't think he'd remember he froze that night." He didn't elaborate. Later in his chambers, Greaves sat alone. The courthouse had emptied. Marching drums echoed faintly through the walls. He slid open the locked drawer. Inside, wrapped in a linen handkerchief, was a military ribbon singed at the edge. He unfolded it and turned it over. Etched on the back, in careful script, Merritt. He held it between his fingers, thumb tracing each letter like a prayer. When Walter Merritt entered the courtroom, no one looked up. When he left, no one could look away. The bailiff pushed the heavy doors open, and for a beat, all that could be heard was the soft shuffle of chains brushing against worn shoes. Walter walked with a steadiness that defied the shackles on his ankles and the cuffs on his wrists. His coat, still patched and too large at the shoulders, sagged with years, but his back remained straight. A murmur passed through the pews. The benches creaked under the weight of small-town curiosity. Two older women in quilted jackets exchanged whispers. A teenager in the back snickered. Someone cleared their throat loudly, too loudly, and let it hang in the stale air. Walter didn't flinch. He moved to the defense table, flanked by a deputy who didn't bother to look at him. He lowered himself slowly into the chair beside Julia Tran, whose yellow legal pad was already half filled with notes. She didn't speak to him, but her eyes were alert, tracking everything. The room, the expressions, and above all, the Judge Greaves entered without announcement. The courtroom stood out of habit more than reverence. He wore his robe like armor, his face carefully blank. But as he settled into his seat and glanced down at the docket, his gaze paused just a flicker when he saw the defendant's name. Then it hardened again. Julia stood. "Your Honor, I'm requesting a continuance. We're in the process of verifying Mr. Merritt's military history, which may explain both his lack of formal records and the circumstances of the incident." ADA Carl Denson rose smoothly, with respect. "Your Honor, the incident is well documented. The defendant approached a minor in a public park. When questioned, he provided no ID, no address, and has remained largely uncooperative." "We have no indication this man is who he says he is," Julia countered. "He never said who he was, that's the point." Denson spread his hands. "Then why the mystery? Why the silence?" Greaves remained quiet, flipping through the papers before him. He didn't look at Walter yet. Yet Julia took a breath. He had this with him. She lifted the scorched badge from a plastic evidence pouch, a medic's insignia, damaged, yes, but real. Greaves's eyes snapped to it. "This isn't something you find at a flea market," Julia continued. "And while we haven't matched it to official inventory—" "Because there is no inventory," Denson interrupted. "Because he's not listed anywhere." Greaves raised a hand. "Let her finish," Julia nodded. "It was found alongside a dog tag, half snapped, and a photograph of 6 soldiers in Korea, early 70s. No names, no date, but enough to raise questions." She turned slightly toward Walter. "He hasn't explained it. He hasn't tried to. But maybe that's what makes it real." Greaves studied her for a long moment, then turned to Walter. Walter met his gaze just briefly. "Do you have anything to say?" the judge asked. Walter's voice was quiet, but it reached the back of the room. "Some metals melt, some men stay quiet." There was a pause and then a sound from the gallery, a faint laugh from a child, barely more than a giggle. Walter turned toward it. His eyes softened just for a moment, and the corners of his mouth lifted. A veteran in the second row. A man with a tremor in his hands and a bronze pin on his cap stared at Walter, squinting, like trying to place an old dream. Greaves blinked slowly. The words were there. The voice, the weight. He looked down at the paper again, but it may as well have been blank. Court will recess, he said abruptly, standing. 15 minutes. Julia looked over at Walter, eyebrows raised. He didn't move. In his chambers, Greaves paced once before his desk, then opened the center drawer and pulled out the linen-wrapped object. He unwrapped it carefully. The metal inside was scorched on one side. The ribbon faded. The engraving was faint, but still legible. To W.M. Saved my life. He stared at it for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and whispered, "Find me the parade schedule. Tomorrow, I'll fix this where it matters." In a town full of banners and brass bands, it was a quiet man in an old coat who stole the show. Clearfield's main street glowed in the morning light, chilled but clear. Rows of folding chairs stretched along both sidewalks, filled with bundled-up elders in wool hats and thick scarves. Young families with thermoses of cider and schoolchildren, waving miniature flags. Paper stars hung from lampposts, and red, white, and blue bunting trimmed every shop window. The scent of kettle corn and cinnamon rolls drifted through the crisp air, blending with the distant beat of a snare drum. The high school marching band emerged first feet, stamping tubas, gleaming flutes, catching sunlight. Behind them came a line of fire trucks, horns silent red paint polished for the day. Then came local veterans, some in full uniform, others in navy blazers with rows of ribbons pinned over their hearts, riding in open jeeps or walking with canes, nodding to cheers from the crowd. Near the platform at the center of Town Square, Julia Tran stood just behind the line of dignitaries. In her gloved hands, she held a folded printout of the photo that had started it all. She scanned the crowd, her eyes resting briefly on Mrs. Jeanette Moore, seated in the front row, with a plaid blanket on her lap and a small American flag in her hand. The librarian's eyes were already misty even before the mayor finished his well-practiced opening remarks. Judge Ronald Greaves stood next. He wore his full black robe over a collared shirt and scarf, his posture solemn but composed. He held a printed speech in one hand. The microphone screeched once as he stepped up to it. Then he folded the pages neatly and set them aside. "There's a man among us." Greaves began, his voice amplified and clear. "He's not on the program. No medals are being pinned to his chest. No flags folded in his name. But 50 years ago, in a place I never planned to remember, that man saved my life." The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling through scarves and whispers. Julia glanced at Walter Merritt, who stood off to the side near the back of the crowd. His coat had been brushed clean, his shoes, though old, had been wiped down. His face was unreadable. "I failed to recognize him," Greaves continued. "Until now." A hush fell. Greaves turned toward Walter and raised a hand, gesturing him forward. "Mr. Merritt, would you join us?" Walter didn't move. Someone coughed. A child shifted in their folding chair. Then slowly, Walter stepped forward. He walked past the flag bearers, past the platform edge, each step measured and sure. The brass section began to lower their instruments, sensing something shift. In the moment, Julia felt her breath catch. In the stillness, even the winter breeze seemed to quiet. One veteran seated near the front stood, slowly straight-backed, his cap in hand. Another followed, then another, and then Greaves spoke again. "I ask everyone who values courage to stand." Now chairs creaked. Gloves brushed knees from one end of Main Street to the other. People rose, grandfathers and granddaughters, mayors and mail carriers. Even the children stood uncertain but solemn, small flags drooping in mittened hands. Walter paused at the steps. He removed his cap and held it to his chest. His eyes stayed low, but his chin lifted just slightly. Applause began, soft, unsure, then stronger. It built, not like a stadium roar, but like something private passing from one person to another. A tribute. A reckoning. He nodded, overwhelmed lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came. The judge stepped aside, offering him the microphone. Walter looked at it, then looked away. Behind him, the brass band began to play. America the Beautiful. The moment held, stretched, then settled. Somewhere on the edge of the square, a photographer clicked. In the pause after the music faded, a teenage boy standing near Julia leaned over and asked softly, "What did he do?" She answered, "He showed up even when no one saw him once." Walter Merritt sat unseen on a bench. Now that bench bears his name. The late November wind curled through Clearfield's Memorial Park, scattering the last of the autumn leaves around. Bundled figures gathering for a quiet ceremony. Thanksgiving banners now fluttered where Veterans Day bunting had hung just a week before. Children wore turkey hats made of construction paper, and the scent of cinnamon and clove wafted faintly from Maple Diner across the street. Walter stood beside the newly restored bench, his old coat replaced by a weathered brown jacket that somehow still looked like him. Beside him, a three-legged mutt named Lucky sat obediently tail-brushing against the stone path. The bronze plaque mounted on the bench read simply, "To those who served, we remember. We see you now, Walter Merritt, combat medic. Korea, 1972. Emily Merritt stepped closer. The years had changed her, but the resemblance to Alicia was startling. Her eyes, the same shade of storm gray as her father's, held a quiet storm of their own, anger, sorrow, and something else, uncertainty. He handed her the letter. Alicia's handwriting, delicate and looping, spanned the pages, dated 1980. Folded 4 times, yellowed at the edges. "I never knew this existed," Emily said softly. Walter's voice was low. "She wrote every week. I wasn't strong enough to answer after I came back." Emily looked down, tears wetting her lashes. "Why?" "Give it to me now because you asked," he said, "and I want to try." Their silence stretched not from absence but from possibility nearby. Julia Tran approached holding a large frame wrapped in brown paper. She handed it to Walter, who peeled the paper back slowly, honorably discharged with distinction. United States Army below that, a copy of his old unit's insignia long declassified, and a letter signed by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. "Your service was never forgotten," Julia said. "Just buried under the wrong paperwork," Walter nodded once. "Thank you for digging." The ceremony ended with a soft round of applause. The few residents gathered, shook hands, patted backs, and slipped away quietly. As the crowd thinned, a few paused to glance at the bench, linger at the plaque, and let the moment settle. Later that afternoon, in the high school auditorium, rows of teenagers shifted impatiently in their seats. Julia took the microphone briefly to introduce a new town initiative, the Forgotten Veterans Archive, a community effort to recover, document, and honor stories lost to bureaucracy and silence. Walter walked to the podium a bit stiffly. Lucky waited just off stage. "Sometimes kindness takes time to be seen," he said, his voice measured but sure. "Sometimes truth hides behind silence. That doesn't make it less true." He looked at the rows of students. Some leaned forward. Others simply watched, uncertain what to make of him. "Don't wait 50 years to listen afterward." Julia found him backstage, packing up a thermos and half a sandwich. "You did well. Still don't like microphones," she smiled. "Think you'd speak at Veterans Week next year?" Walter paused, considered. "I'll bring the coffee that evening." Maple Diner was quieter than usual. A small sign sat on the corner booth nearest the window. "Reserved. Mr. Merritt Sundays." Greaves passed by the bench just before sunset. The judge, now weeks from retirement, carried a small velvet box. He paused, then opened it, revealing his own service medal, carefully polished. He laid it gently beside the plaque at the bench's base, then walked away without a word. Across the square, Walter and Lucky made their usual evening loop. As they approached the bench, Walter spotted a young boy sitting there alone, legs swinging, a backpack resting beside him. Walter stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a paper napkin-wrapped muffin. Silently, he held it out. The boy looked up. No words were exchanged. Just a quiet hand and a quiet offering. On a quiet bench in a small American town, a man once unseen became the reminder of what we too often forget. His silence didn't speak of shame, but of sacrifice misunderstood. Not because he lacked worth, but because the world forgot how to see. When we stop measuring value by appearance or status, we begin to rediscover the quiet dignity that walks among us every day. Kindness doesn't always ask for recognition, but it leaves its mark all the same. Like the warmth of a porch light left on for someone returning home unseen, goodness can still guide us through the darkest corners of memory. If this story gently stirred something in you, consider passing that warmth along to someone still waiting to be seen.